All right, so we're going to start modifying our 2550 work, our building shatter. Now that we have the building shattered, somewhere in there, I'll open this with DJB. So this is where we left off last time. The building shatters, falls into the pit. Cool. Now we can actually add some sort of liquid here to add some splash to these items. Okay. So copy your preferences just like before. I think I put mine in here. So we copy the preferences. We go into our Maya folder. We go into 2015 and delete that folder and then paste the new one. I already have mine good. So now I can open up Maya. Okay, so now we're in here, so I'm going to set my project. To that same 2550 work building shatter folder. And then I'm going to open up that ready to render one. Okay, this is where we're going to start off with this one. Okay, so if I rewind this and hit play, you'll see this is where we left off last time. Okay, and if I scrub, you can see all the animation is locked in, perfect. Okay, so what we need to do is we have to create a container here for our liquid to fall into. Okay, now I don't like to do it to pre-cache stuff, so this piece of geometry right now is a cached piece of geometry, meaning that if you remember, we read it from the Alembic cache and we imported it, and now this is basically being read from a file. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to before I did that, after dynamics. Okay, that way I can get this. No, that's not the right one. We sort these by date. Oh, before bake, that's what I wanted. There we go. So now I have that same shape inside here. Okay, so I'm going to take this piece of geometry and I'm just going to export that piece of geometry, call it ground, and then I'm going to open up the ground scene. If I can click today. There we go. Alright, now again, we're at the same thing where, you know, our screen is so big we can't see the stuff. So I have to click on my camera selector, go to the attribute editor, take this far clipping plane, add a 0 here, put a 10 there. Okay. Alright, so now this still has bullet on it, even though I exported it. Here's bullet. And if I go to my outliner, you can see bullet solver actually came in too, and so did the P sphere, which is over there. Okay, so sometimes you'll get this other stuff that comes in with it. That's no big deal. I'm just going to go to bullet and say remove entire or delete entire bullet system. And now bullet's gone from here. I can delete this, and now I just have a piece of geometry like the original one that I had. Okay, so now I can kind of modify this a bit. One thing I want to do is I need to have a container for my liquid. So basically, if I go to faces, that's my container for the liquid. Okay, the rest of this is just colliding stuff. Okay, so I'm going to copy that. So under the polygon menu, under edit mesh, under faces, there we go, duplicate. Okay, so I duplicate that face, and I'm not going to do anything else from, like moving this. I want to keep it exactly where it is for now. I'm going to right click and go to object mode and just click on one of the pieces. Okay, so now if I go to my outliner, you'll see I have my P plane up here, but if I open it up, there's polysurface 1, polysurface 2. Okay, so let's rename polysurface 2 to be liquid creator. There we go. Okay, so I'm going to take this liquid creator, I'm going to center the pivot, and I'm just going to scale it down slightly. Okay, something like that, just to give myself a little bit of offset all the way around it. Okay, good, good. I'm going to delete the history on both of these things. There we go. I'm going to click on the ground here and call this ground. Okay, so that's good. And I'm just going to grab both of these and just freeze the transformations. That way they're back to where they were. And I'm just going to save this scene and then reopen that after render one, or ready to render. Alright, there we go. Okay, so now I won't need this piece of geometry. So I'm not going to delete it, I'm just going to add it to a new layer and hide it. And then I'm going to import that ground. Okay, so seemingly we have exactly what we had before, except now we have this little container here. Okay, once something's baked, it doesn't matter. I could actually, not have the piece of geometry here, and all the stuff will collide the same way. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on this object, and our scene scale is huge. If you remember from before, if I created a plane, our plane is super duper tiny right there. Okay. All right, and so by default, Bifrost is going to come in with some pretty high settings because our scene scale is so big. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to scale this down to something really small, like 0.01. That should be good. And I'm going to go to Bifrost, and I'm going to say Create Liquid. Okay. Now this is going to create Bifrost inside of this little container. Okay. Now under the Bifrost menu, we can also turn on the Bifrost heads-up display. So I turn that on, and I can look and see how many particles I have. Right now I have 59,000 particles. Okay. If I go to the attribute editor and I go to my liquid container, right now my voxel size is 0.5. And a voxel is basically like a 3D pixel. Alright, so it's basically like this green container out here has these square pixels going like this and square pixels going like that. So each one of those pixels is a voxel. And so right now each voxel is 0.5, meaning that I have, 59,000 particles, Bifrost particles inside here. If I make this bigger, I'll just set it to 5, you'll see that now I have 252 Bifrost particles. Okay? The less particles I have, the faster it's going to simulate. But also the less accurate it is and the less geometry we're going to have. Okay? However, at this super duper small size, 5 is a big number. But as we take this shape now and reset this back to being at 1, it'll recalculate and refill our container. Okay, so it's still thinking, still thinking, still thinking. And if I click on this little Bifrost container, I can see that it's definitely still thinking here. Down here on the bottom right, it says Bifrost 0%, so it's still like considering how big that should be. If we want to stop it, we can hit stop, and then go to the attribute editor once it catches up with us. Alright, it finally caught up with us, and if you look now at 5 with this huge container, we have 8 million particles. Okay, that's a huge amount of particles in this scene. So for now, for setting up purposes, I'm just going to go to my container again, and I'm going to set this to an even higher number, like 15. Because I want something right now that I could just work with. I can just test it out, make sure everything's working, and then when I'm ready, then I can lower this number. Okay, so at 15, we're at 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. That's still almost a million particles. Let's set this to 25. Alright, so 292,000 particles is good for what we're doing right now, just kind of testing it out, testing out the waters, right? That's a joke. Alright, so another thing I need to do is under Emission, not under Emission, under, there's several spots we can edit. Let me go to the outliner. This is Bifrost right here. We have the Bifrost Liquid, which is the little particle-y things. And then I have my ground plane liquid creator. Okay, that's where our liquid's being created from, is this little container here. So in the attribute editor, there's a Bifrost section, liquid emission, and what I want to do is I want to turn off continuous emission. Okay, and what that means is it's not going to continually have particles being created. It just creates them once, and that's where they're at. Okay. There's also a mode. We're going to leave it at solid. Okay, but you could put this at shell if you had a specific reason for doing something like that. If we would need to disable it, we can disable it. Okay, we want to keep it, so we're going to leave the enabled on. Okay, so now we have a container. So now if I just close this and we hit play, what we're going to see is that it disappears. Okay, and I'll just let it go to about there. Now, even though it disappeared, it's actually doing stuff. If you look down here, it'll say Bifrost container, submitted 82, frames exceeded 5. If I click on this box, you'll see this yellow bar and the green. The green means it's done calculating. The yellow means it's currently calculating that. Okay? So if I go into here in the green area, you'll see there's my liquid. And it's not doing a whole lot. We have a pretty big size scene. You can kind of see a little bit of movement there. Okay, it'll actually change color the more it moves. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pause the video and come back when we have a little bit more of this done. Okay, so I've let it chug along for this. It's been a couple minutes. And you can see how it turns white. That means that the particles are definitely moving. Now as my pieces go into the liquid, they're not colliding. Okay, so we have to set up a collider to say, hey, objects collide with this stuff. And also if I zoom underneath or spin underneath, you'll see that my particles are actually falling through the ground. Okay, so I have to fix that too so they don't fall through the ground, because if I let this go forever, these things would just fall for a very long distance. Alright, so I need to make sure that I have the particles selected, the Bifrost container selected. I shift click the ground and I go to Bifrost Add Collider. It says the selected ground has a large area, may run out of memory or take a while to simulate. Yes, that's fine. Over here where it says Bifrost Collider mode is right now it's set to solid. I want to set this to shell. Okay. And I'm going to also grab the building, shift click the box, and go to Bifrost Add Collider. It'll say the selected has a large area. Yes, go ahead. Now this one I want to keep it at solid. On here, because we have this dip here, if this was set to solid, it would just basically overwrite it. It would just eliminate all the Bifrost stuff there. Okay? So because it's set to shell on the ground, it works perfectly. The building should be set to solid. So that's good there. And then I want to do one more thing, and this is just a precautionary thing, is that once we start simulating this thing, our Bifrost is going to start flying all over the place. Sometimes you'll get stuff under here that just falls through, and it's calculating it for no reason. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add in what's called a kill plane. So I'm going to grab the container and go to Bifrost Add Kill Plane, and I'm going to scale this thing up. Thinking. There we go. Stop thinking. And I'm just going to make this kill plane huge and stick it under the ground. Now another thing I can do is while I'm doing all these Bifrost settings, I can actually disable Bifrost, do a bunch of stuff, and then it'll actually go a little slower. Okay? Or a little faster. We don't want it to go slower. There you go. So I grab the container. There we go. Under the Bifrost liquid container, I just say enable off. Now it's not going to enable. Okay, so now I can go to my outliner, grab the kill plane, scale it up, and you'll see there's no lag in doing such a thing. Okay, so I want to set this kill plane basically right underneath my container. Alright, so this box here is the ground. Okay, back to the side view. So that's the ground is right here. And that's where I want that to be. I'm also going to check and make sure, yeah, that's about that. Okay, good. I think I might scale this up a tiny more bit. I think I'm a little bit too far away from the edges here. So if you see how far away I am from this edge, I just want to close that gap a bit more. So I'm just scaling it about there. Okay, so you can see if I hide my grid, there you go. You can see how close I am to this edge, so that when I create my Bifrost, it doesn't have too far to travel before it collides with that. Okay, because one thing that can happen is that we have our colliding shape, and it just falls through. All right, so I'm going to save this scene as, and we'll just change this to building shatter building. Let's see. Bifrost added to building 01. There we go. Okay, so I'm going to make a new scene, and I just want to go through some of the Bifrost things that we're covering, just so you can see how it's working. Okay, so by creating a cube and then adding Bifrost to it by going to create liquid, we have a bunch of little tiny particle Bifrosty things in here. That's the best way to see that. Okay, so now if I hit play, okay, it's again calculating. So I'll grab this, and then I can see that green bar, and you can see how it's just basically it's pouring down. Okay, the faster it moves, the whiter they are. So they start off as this blue color, and they just gradually pick up more speed, pick up more speed, pick up more speed, and you'll see down here they're a bit whiter than they were up there. Okay, and it's only going to cache, it's only going to calculate to the end of where I hit stop. So if I hit play again, it'll calculate all the way to 114 because that's where I hit stop. Okay, so if I don't want this to continuously emit, I grab the container and I turn my continuous emission off. So now I hit play, stop it, and I can grab the container, there it is, and you'll see how it just emitted the 1 bit and just started falling down. Okay, so now I can go in here and say, okay, well now I got some particles. Let me grab the container and go to the container here and change this voxel size to, let's say, 0.1. Okay, so now we're dealing with about 5,000 Bifrost particles. I'll hit play again. That should be good there. And again, I'll watch this kind of go through, and you can see that this is just going to keep falling down forever. Right? So that's why we want to create some sort of container to hold it. So I'm going to create another cube, and it's the same size, so I'm just going to make it slightly bigger than it. And I'm going to go to faces and delete the top face. Okay. And this other cube that's in here, our first one that's emitting, I can just put that on a layer. I don't need to see that anymore. If I need to edit it, I can go to the outliner and just grab it from here. Okay, and I even like to call this emitter cube. Alright, so now again, I hit play, and oops, I have to rewind it first, then hit play. It's still loading the last cache because nothing's changed for it. All we did was create that cube, and this cube isn't affecting it. So I need to make sure I grab this, shift click that, and add that as a collider. Now I rewind and hit play, and you'll see that there's nothing there. Okay, there's a little something there, but it's like around the box, and that's because our on the box itself it's set to solid. So again, we'll set that to shell. Okay, we'll hit play, and you'll see all the little particles inside there, and you can even see some of them kind of falling out. Okay, even though it's colliding with it, you'll see that some just fall right through the bottom and start falling out, and then there's some that leak over the top and fall out. Okay, so I could make this box a bit bigger and rewind it and hit play, and then what's going to happen is the particles are going to have to come to rest, so they're going to fall down. and come to rest. Now this, the reason that it didn't do anything, because I just happened to have it at a perfect width, okay? Just like in bullet, we have a thickness here, and our thickness is right now set to 1. So I set this to 0.05, rewind it again, grab that, hit play. What we should see is that the particles actually start going outward, okay? And at 0.05, you'll see that it goes right through it. It's an odd thing. But let's try it again. We'll put in a different number. Try 0.1. Grab the box, rewind it, hit play. And again, they're falling through. All right, let's set that to 1 again. Just to verify that it was indeed colliding with it. Well, it was. Let me make that a bit bigger. There we go. Alright, so now it's actually colliding and falling and doing that. Okay? So sometimes what we're going to have is we're going to have several pieces of geometry in order for this thing to look correct. Okay, we have our emitting geometry, which is here. We have our colliding piece of geometry, which if we watch this again, you can see right here, it's like a perfectly sized container, but you'll see that it's just slightly off. Okay, if I go to the top view, you can see how there's this big distance between these two things. And then I may even have another piece of geometry that I would use to do my final rendering, which would be this one. That's not a cube, that's a plane. Great. Polygon. Okay, so now it's not colliding with this one, but as far as we're concerned, it sure does look like it's colliding with that one. Okay, because it's not going outside that box. And even though we have that here and we have these colliding things, you'll see that we still get these little guys who kind of creep out and fall down. Okay, so that's why we would create the kill plane, just to eliminate all these dudes falling out. And you'll see once they hit the kill plane, oops, I probably got to rewind it first. Once they start falling out and hitting the kill plane, they just go away. So we're not going to even see these guys because they're just disappearing right away. And that's exactly what we want to happen, is they just disintegrate. Okay? Or we figure out a way to block it so it doesn't intersect that. It might be modifying this position, just kind of moving that down a little bit. It could be just changing the density. It could be changing some of our other settings. We want to try all the simple things first before we start upping our calculations. Okay, so now that we have that, let's go and create a sphere. And I'm just going to add bullet to this. So I'm just going to go to create active body. It's sphere. It's dynamic. Wonderful. And I'm just going to hit play after I rewind it. And you'll see it just falls straight down. Right there. Okay, so I'm going to grab the sphere, grab the bullet, Bifrost container, and add that as a collider. That way we can simulate and see what's going to happen when something collides with our Bifrost. So I'll go up to about 90. Okay, and you'll see what the effect of that is, that it comes in and it pushes it out. Obviously that's what would happen if we actually dropped something in there. And you'll even see on the bottom we get this funky thing happening because it's not colliding with the box, it just goes straight through. Okay, and then it falls out the side, and then it hits the kill plane and dies. Okay, so this is essentially what we're doing on our other one, except we're also saying that, you know, this other object is going to be a this object is going to be a colliding object. And sometimes you have to go to Bifrost and you have to say Bifrost options. No. Disable this. There you go. Disable it and re-enabling it. Basically, it forces the cache to recalculate. There we go. Alright, so now the bullet is not re-updating because we didn't cache the bullet. Okay, so we get a similar type of effect. Okay, now again, it's something we have to kind of play with to get all these things to work correctly. Alright, and if we go to something like this, and we hit the render button, you'll see we get nothing in here. If we change this to mental ray, and we render it, you'll see we actually do get some sort of liquid happening here. But right now, because we're at such a small scale, this is, you know, that's essentially what we're working with in our other scene. We're getting basically blobby type effects, okay? So if we refined this, made this bigger, all that stuff that we're doing in the other scene, it would make much more sense. But as far as quickness and understanding some of the tools, it's a lot easier just to be able to pop into this view and look at these things and see what's happening, okay? So don't be afraid to go into a new scene and just play with some of these Bifrost things here to do that, okay? Alright, so I'm going to save the scene as just Bifrost playing, and if we need to come back to this, we can. But I just wanted to go over some of the stuff that we need to do in the other scene. That's not the correct one. Bifrost Add to Building. There we go. Okay. So I need to grab a new perspective camera. There we go. Alright. And Bifrost. Figured out why my Bifrost stopped in here. I disabled it before we went to commercial break. So I re-enabled it right there. And under Bifrost here, this is what I was looking for before, is a flush scratch cache. So if we have a cache already built, we can just flush it and it gets rid of it. Alright, so now if we look at this and see where we're at, we'll see that we have our Bifrost particles in here. We have about 304,000 particles. This big object is a colliding object. This ground plane is a colliding object. So I'm going to also, I forgot the ball, click the ball, shift click my Bifrost container, and add that as a collider. Yes. And then I'm going to save this and then let it play and see where we're at. Okay, so I'm going to pause the video, just hit play all the way to the end, and then once it's done caching, we'll come back and take a look at it. Alright, so here's a rendering of it at frame 93. You'll see that it looks very blobby. That's again because we don't have a whole lot of resolution in there. It's basically creating these big chunky things. So once we lower that res, that'll help. Also, we can convert this. When we hit the render button, it's doing like an auto conversion to a mesh. But we can do a manual conversion and then have a little bit more control over how this thing behaves. Okay, so now that I have these frames and I hit play, okay, let's see. You can see how now everything's kind of interacting together with these things. And that's actually behaving pretty well. So far it looks pretty good. There is water coming out of the thing, which is expected because it was already full. The stuff that's going under the kill plane is getting destroyed, which is what we want. Okay, and then once we add more resolution, like I said, we'll have a little bit more look to this whole thing. Let me go into my render settings, and I'm just going to take my quality down to a really low number, like 0.1. And make sure I have final gather turned off. I don't need that at the moment. And then I can do another test render just to see again what it looks like at a different stage. Obviously it's going to be darker because there's no final gather, but it just gives you a good preview as to what's happening in your scene. And that's essentially it. It looks like a lot of the water is over here, over there. Okay, nothing too fancy. It actually looks like we are out of water. Okay, so we can go back and tweak some of our settings if we wanted to. There's a whole lot of stuff inside the settings here: the droplet threshold, the droplet merge threshold, the acceleration, the vorticity. The best thing to do is to look through some of these. Bifrost liquid liquid container. And if your help works, it'll take you right to it. If your help doesn't work, Bifrost liquid container help. There we go. So inside the help, my help, I actually went to help here, my help, and this got me to the Bifrost. And then here's a bunch of different things that you can go through and see all the different things. What does the master voxel size do? Enabling starting frame gravity, gravity direction. Okay. So if you want definitions and what each specific item does, this is a great spot to start. Just going through some of these things. The start frame here, for some simulations, you actually want your start frame to not start at 1. You want it to start at, let's say, -50. That way it has time to kind of settle and then do its thing. The scratch cache is the stuff that we're dealing with right now, where it's caching it. It's actually saving this information out to the hard drive. If I go to my computer, I used to have 11 gigs. Now I have 6 gigs free of data, because this cache is kind of setting it up. So some of these, like vorticity that we have here, we can just search for vorticity right there. Enables a calculation of the vorticity channel that is accumulation of rotation, curl of velocity field. Okay, so basically the curliness of our stuff. The vorticity channel is not physically accurate, but can be used to simulate churning when viewing and rendering. Okay, so you know there's a lot of different options in here. You don't need all of them. For now, we're just going to stick with just this. Okay, we have that happening here. Our next step in this is to then take the master voxel size down. So instead of this being 50, we would put this at, let's say, 20. And then we would rewind it. And then we would hit play. And then we would let this cache out and see what happens. Now, because I've set this to 20, I'm just going to stop it there. My hard drive space, which is now at 8, is definitely going to be eaten up by a lot more data because of that. Okay, so now we have 482,000. I'd actually like to be around 1 million. Is where for this assignment I think we could probably get to 1 million. Bifrost particles. So I'm going to reset this again to maybe 10. Alright, so at 15, I'm actually at 834,000, which is a pretty good number. Obviously, the more the merrier, but you know, we just have to have the calculation abilities to do that. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit play, and I'm going to let this thing calculate, and then I'll come back and make it into a mesh, and then render it out. Okay, but I'm going to save this scene, just in case it crashes. And I'm going to open up that other scene that we were working on, our Bifrost playing one, just so you can see some of the settings inside here we can tweak. So I'm going to rewind this and play it again. Okay, so here's the liquid coming out. So if I want this to be a liquid, I'm going to go to the, first let me put this on a layer. I'll call this Bifrost container. And then I can just turn that off. Okay, I don't need to see it. I just need to be able to go into the liquid container here, and Bifrost shape. There it is, under the shape. I'm going to go down to Bifrost Meshing and enable the Bifrost Meshing. And what this does is it creates a mesh, an actual physical mesh inside here that is now animated. So instead of seeing those particles, we'll see the mesh. And then we can adjust these settings inside here. So I can say the resolution factor, let's take that up to 2. Okay, it's going to take a second. There it goes. And just so you can see the before and after, here's 1, there's 2, there's 3. Okay, so basically what we're doing is we're adding more divisions to this every time. Okay, and the more divisions it has, again, the nicer it's going to look when it renders, but the longer it's going to take to render. Okay, so there's 3, then we put it back to 1. Okay, so we get more divisions that way. So 2 is probably good for what we're doing in the other one. We also have this droplet reveal factor, and I don't really like to scrub these. If you see, if I scrub it, it just takes a long time to do. So if you just click or type in a number, you can see that change happen a lot easier. Oops, let me turn that wireframe off. All right. So what this droplet reveal factor is doing, now to get back to that, I have to go to the outliner, grab my Bifrost liquid, and under the shape, I can get to the meshing. Okay, so the lower this number is, the more likely it's going to reveal droplets. The higher the number is, the more stuff is just going to kind of blend together into one shape. Okay, so there's that. And if I change this to 0.1, you can see we're more likely to have droplets inside here. Let me take this resolution back down to, for now, 0.5. Okay. Let's see, we hit play, the ball comes in, splash. Okay, and then if I take this, you can see the animation there, take this to 0.1, okay, so we can play with that kind of thing. The surface radius is from the particles that we were looking at. If I pull these back in, when the particles we're looking at here, how big is each particle representing a part of that surface? So if I take this up to 2, it's going to have that radius be a little bit bigger, a little bit tighter there. Take this up to 5. Okay, so you can see what's happening with that. 0.1, where basically their surface is gone. Okay, now it'd be nice to be able to edit this kind of stuff on our big one, but we really don't have the ability to go through and tweak a whole lot of stuff on it without it taking a very, very long time. And because we have limited amount of time, we're just going to kind of leave these things as they are. But I encourage you to kind of play with these, especially like in this playing scene, where you can go through and really tweak these settings to get it to look like some sort of surface. You can even do like pouring simulations using Bifrost. Okay, so there's that. There's also this Bifrost, if I click on the shape, liquid material. And the liquid material, there's a whole bunch of stuff inside here where we can control the reflection, we can control the foaminess. Okay, so some of the stuff that's in here that is kind of important is the foam remap. If we were to render this guy again, there's no lighting in the scene, there's nothing crazy fancy, so it's probably not going to look very good right now. But if I just drop in an HDR image, and turn that off. I'm going to turn these boxes off also. I'm just going to grab the boxes and drop them onto my layer 1. Okay, basically it looks like water right now, just like a big gloppy crystal of water. Okay, so we can play with some of the stuff to get it to look more watery. If we go to our input remap for the foam, basically what this is doing is saying when the vorticity, which is one of the options in here, one of the features, is between 85 and 120, that's when I want to see the foam. Okay, and here's the coloring of the foam, which is white, and then here's how it goes from that low point to that high point. So what we can do is you can play with these, obviously, just crank this way down like that and like that, let's say, just for fun. It was 85 and 120. Always remember the defaults. Okay, I don't see a huge difference there, right? So it's hard to visualize it as to what's actually happening on this. So I'm going to make a new layer and just drop it on there. I'm going to pull this original one back up so we can see these. There it is. And you'll see that there's not a whole lot. Let me hide this HDR too. Let's drop it onto that layer. Okay. There's not a whole lot of white happening in this area. Okay. When I rewind it, at no point is there a whole lot of white, meaning there's not a whole lot of movement. But what I can do is go into this here, and under the Bifrost liquid container, not the liquid container, the shape, I can take this color channel right now, and it's reading velocity. And if I go to there you go. I have to enable voxels up here, okay? And then if I come down here to this color channel, it changes to vorticity. This is what the color channel is remapping to, okay? So the blue to the white, that's where we're getting the speed when it's set to velocity, like that. So as we hit play, we're not seeing any white in here because it's looking for really, really fast stuff. So as I pull this back here, now I'll start to peek in some of those white areas, okay? So I can do that same kind of thing to figure this out. So let's set our vorticity to this. Our channel max, let's set that to 100. And as I pull this in, I can basically, I'm trying to isolate those areas I want the foam to happen. So this is 0.07 and 0.04 and 7, okay? So I can come back to this and say, so for my input max, let's set that to 7. or sorry, to 4, and that to 7. And then what we should get is a bit more foam happening inside here because it's using these remapped values. And we're definitely getting something that looks a little bit more interesting than what we had originally. Okay, now in this little block of water it's not going to be a huge deal, but on our other one it is going to be a bigger deal because we want that foam to happen, because as the blocks fall into the water, that foam should be happening inside there. Okay, so I can rehide this, bring that back, save this, render it again. And because our mesh has a bit different attributes, you can see the different shape that we're now getting because we've meshed it. Okay, but we can continue playing with those. A lot of these settings that are inside of this Bifrost liquid material, here's the foam remap. There's also a reflection and a reflection remap. Okay, so we can actually change how it's reflecting. Here's refraction remap. And again, we can figure out how we want this to be refracting. So I'll pull it down to something like that. Let's render this region. Oh, I didn't enable it. It helps to enable the things that you're trying to edit. Alright, so you can see there's a little bit of refraction area here that's not being, or a little bit of transparent area that's not being refracted. Okay, so there's lots of cool stuff that's inside here. The other thing we're going to do is turn on under options, which want to make sure export vertex color is checked on, which it is. That's good. Yep. Okay. So what we're going to do is, let me jump back to the other scene. We'll just save this. Open that scene up. Okay, is we're going to let this Bifrost cache out, mesh it out, and then we're going to go to compute and cache to disk. Okay, and this is actually going to save it to the disk. So it'll be Sarcona Bifrost da 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 da. I'm going to call this building sim. We'll do it in the time slider and we'll hit create. And what that's going to do, I didn't have a thing selected, is it's going to write out all that data to the hard drive. So if I grab this now, compute and cache to disk, building sim, create. It's going to go through and write all that out to the hard drive. Then I can save my scene as written out to the hard drive stuff, and then re-render this whole thing again. Okay, so the next one that we have is going to have that liquid simulation in there. The other thing we want to do, I'm going to hit escape. Before we render, is we don't need this shape in here anymore. So I can just make a new layer, call this emitter, and just turn that off. Okay, so now when we have our liquid in here, if I jump back to, if I click on this, and it ever calculates on frame 1, then it'll be cached out. Now the reason I'm not doing this in the video is because this might take all day long for this thing to cache out. I actually may run out of hard drive space before it finishes caching out. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to have to clear up some files and then let it go. Now this is something you might have to let it go overnight, and definitely make sure you have lots of storage space. Okay, so that's where we're at. Make sure you rename the rendering here. So build break. Call this Bifrost added. Image compression should be RLE. Our quality would be back up to 2 when we render. Final gallery back on. And that's it. Okay, so I would just let this cache out. remesh it, adjust some of my mesh settings if I need to, and then render it back out. Alright, we don't need to see the Bifrost here, so we can again add that to another layer. Okay, because we want to have all that off when we render this final out. We should just have this building, the ground, the ball, and our mesh of our liquid simulation. Okay, and that's what should be rendering out. Alright, so that's where we're at with this video. If it finishes before her class, then I will obviously have some more stuff that I can show. But if it doesn't, I'll just show it another time. Okay, this one's going to take you some time just to get that simulation to mesh once you have the setup correct.